Etiquette, Chapter 27, Part 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Kara Schallenberg. Etiquette in Society, in Business, in Politics, and at Home by Emily Post. Chapter 27. Notes and Shorter Letters. Part 4. The Letter of Introduction. A letter of business introduction can be much more freely given than a letter of social introduction. For the former, it is necessary merely that the persons introduced have business interests in common, which are much more easily determined than social compatibility, which is the requisite necessary for the latter. It is of course proper to give your personal representative a letter of introduction to whomever you send him. On the subject of letters of social introduction there is one chief rule. Never ask for letters of introduction, and be very sparing in your offers to write or accept them. Seemingly few persons realize that a letter of social introduction is actually a draft for payment on demand. The form might as well be: the bearer of this has, because of it, the right to demand your interest, your time, your hospitality, liberally and at once, no matter what your inclination may be. Therefore, it is far better to refuse in the beginning than to hedge and end by committing the greater error of unwarrantedly inconveniencing a valued friend or acquaintance. When you have a friend who is going to a city where you have other friends, and you believe that it will be a mutual pleasure for them to meet, a letter of introduction is proper and very easy to write, but sent to a casual acquaintance, no matter how attractive or distinguished the person to be introduced, it is a gross presumption. The more formal note of introduction. Dear Mrs. Marks, Julian Gibbs is going to Buffalo on January 10th to deliver a lecture on his polar expedition, and I am sending him a card of introduction to you. He is very agreeable personally, and I think that perhaps you and Mr. Marks will enjoy meeting him as much as I know he would enjoy knowing you. With kindest regards, in which Arthur joins, very sincerely, Ethel Norman. If Mr. Norman were introducing one man to another, he would give his card to the former, inscribed as follows: Introducing Julian Gibbs, Mr. Arthur Lees Norman, Broadlawns. Also Mr. Norman would send a private letter by mail, telling his friend that Mr. Gibbs is coming, as follows: Dear Marks, I am giving Julian Gibbs a card of introduction to you when he goes to Buffalo on the 10th to lecture. He is an entertaining and very decent fellow, and I think possibly Mrs. Marks would enjoy meeting him. If you can conveniently ask him to your house, I know he would appreciate it. If not, perhaps you will put him up for a day or two at a club. Faithfully, Arthur Norman. Informal letter of introduction. Dear Clare, a very great friend of ours, James Dawson, is to be in Chicago for several weeks. Any kindness that you can show him will be greatly appreciated by yours as always, Ethel Norman. At the same time a second and private letter of information is written and sent by mail. Dear Clare, I wrote you a letter today introducing Jim Dawson. He used to be on the Yalvard football team, perhaps you remember. He is one of the best sort in the world, and I know you will like him. I don't want to put you to any trouble, but do ask him to your house if you can. He plays a wonderful game of golf and a good game of bridge, but he is more a man's than a woman's type of man. Maybe if Tom likes him, he will put him up at a club, as he is to be in Chicago for some weeks. Affectionately always, Ethel. Another example. Dear Caroline, a very dear friend of mine, Mrs. Fred West, is going to be in New York this winter, while her daughter is at Barnard. I am asking her to take this letter to you, as I want very much to have her meet you, and have her daughter meet Pauline. anything that you can do for them will be the same as for me. Yours affectionately, Sylvia Greatlake. The private letter by mail to accompany the foregoing. Dearest Caroline, Mildred West, for whom I wrote to you this morning, is a very close friend of mine. She is going to New York with her only daughter, who, in spite of wanting a college education, is as pretty as a picture, with plenty of come hither in the eye, so do not be afraid that the typical blue stocking is to be thrust upon Pauline. The mother is an altogether lovely person, and I know that you and she will speak the same language. If I didn't, I wouldn't give her a letter to you. Do go and see her as soon as you can. She will be stopping at the Fitzcherry, and probably feeling rather lost at first. She wants to take an apartment for the winter, and I told her I was sure you would know the best real estate and intelligence offices, etc., for her to go to. I hope I am not putting you to any trouble about her, but she is really a darling, and you will like her, I know. Devotedly yours, Sylvia. Directions for procedure upon being given or receiving a letter of introduction will be found in Chapter 2. The third person. In other days, when even verbal messages began with the presenting of compliments, a social note, no matter what its length or purport, would have been considered rude, unless written in the third person. But as in a communication of any length, the difficulty of this form is almost insurmountable, to say nothing of the pedantic effect of its accomplishment, it is no longer chosen, aside from the formal invitation, acceptance, and regret, except for notes to stores or subordinates. For example, Will B. Stern and Company, please send and charge to Mrs. John H. Smith, 2 Madison Avenue, 1 paper of needles, No. 9, 2 spools of white sewing cotton, No. 70, 1 yard of material, sample enclosed, January 6th. To a servant. Mrs. Eminent wishes Patrick to meet her at the station on Tuesday the 8th, at 11:03. She also wishes him to have the shutters opened and the house aired on that day, and a fire lighted in the northwest room. No provisions will be necessary, as Mrs. Eminent is returning to town on the 5:16. Tuesday, March 1st. Letters in the third person are no longer signed, unless the sender's signature is necessary for identification, or for some action on the part of the receiver, such as, Will Mr. Cash please give the bearer 6 yards of material to match the sample enclosed, and oblige Mrs. John H. Smith. A note in third person is the single occasion when a married woman signs Mrs. before her name. The letter of recommendation. A letter of recommendation for membership to a club is addressed to the secretary, and should be somewhat in this form. To the Secretary of the Town Club. My dear Mrs. Brown, Mrs. Titherington Smith, whose name is posted for membership, is a very old and close friend of mine. She is the daughter of the late Reverend Samuel Eminent, and is therefore a member in her own right, as well as by marriage, of representative New York families. She is a person of much charm and distinction, and her many friends will agree with me, I am sure, in thinking that she would be a valuable addition to the club. Very sincerely, Ethel Norman. Recommendation of employees. Although the written recommendation that is given to the employee carries very little weight, compared to the slip from the employment agencies where either yes or no has to be answered to a list of specific and important questions, one is nevertheless put in a trying position when reporting on an unsatisfactory servant. Either a poor reference must be given, possibly preventing a servant from earning her living, or one has to write what is not true. Consequently, it has become the custom to say what one truthfully can of good, and leave out the qualifications that are bad, except in the case of a careless nurse, where evasion would border on the criminal. That solves the poor recommendation problem pretty well, but unless one is very careful, this consideration for the poor one is paid for by the good. In writing for a very worthy servant, therefore, it is of the utmost importance, in fairness to her, or him, to put in every merit that you can think of, remembering that omission implies demerit in each trait of character not mentioned. All good references should include honesty, sobriety, capability, and a reason, other than their unsatisfactoriness, for their leaving. The recommendation for a nurse cannot be too conscientiously written. A lady does not begin a recommendation "to whom it may concern," nor "this is to certify," although housekeepers and head servants writing recommendation use both of these forms, and third-person letters are frequently written by secretaries. A lady, in giving a good reference, should write 200 Park Square. Selma Johnson has lived with me for 2 years as cook. I have found her honest, sober, industrious, neat in person as well as her work, of amiable disposition, a very good cook. She is leaving to my great regret because I am closing my house for the winter. Selma is an excellent servant in every way, and I shall be glad to answer personally any inquiries about her. Josephine Smith. Mrs. Titherington Smith, October, 1921. The form of all recommendations is the same. Blank has lived with me, blank months/years, as blank. I have found him/her, blank. He/she is leaving because blank. Any special remark of added recommendation or showing interest. Signed blank, Mrs. blank, date. Letters of congratulation. Letter of congratulation on engagement. Dear Mary, while we are not altogether surprised, we are both delighted to hear the good news. Jim's family and ours are very close, as you know, and we have always been especially devoted to Jim. He is one of the finest, and now luckiest, of young men, and we send you both every good wish for all possible happiness. Affectionately, Ethel Norman. Just a line, dear Jim, to tell you how glad we all are to hear of your happiness. Mary is everything that is lovely, and, of course, from our point of view, we don't think her exactly unfortunate either. Every good wish that imagination can think of goes to you from your old friends, Ethel and Arthur Norman. I can't tell you, dearest Mary, of all the wishes I send for your happiness. Give Jim my love, and tell him how lucky I think he is, and how much I hope all good fortune will come to you both. Lovingly, Aunt Kate. Congratulation on some especial success. My dear Mrs. Brown, we have just heard of the honors that your son has won. How proud you must be of him! We are both so glad for him and for you. Please congratulate him for us, and believe me, very sincerely, Ethel Norman. Or, Dear Mrs. Brown, we are so glad to hear the good news of David's success. It was a very splendid accomplishment, and we are all so proud of him and of you. Please give him our love and congratulations, and with full measure of both to you, affectionately, Martha Kindhart. Congratulating a friend appointed to high office. Dear John, we are overjoyed at the good news. For once the reward has fallen where it is deserved. Certainly no one is better fitted than yourself for a diplomat's life, and we know you will fill the position to the honor of your country. Please give my love to Alice, and, with renewed congratulations to you from us both, yours always, Ethel Norman. Another example. Dear Michael, we all rejoice with you in the confirmation of your appointment. The state needs just such men as you. If we had more of your sort, the ordinary citizen would have less to worry about. Our best congratulations. John Kindhart. The letter of condolence. Intimate letters of condolence are like love letters in that they are too sacred to follow a set form. One rule, and one only, should guide you in writing such letters. Say what you truly feel. Say that, and nothing else. Sit down at your desk. Let your thoughts dwell on the person you are writing to. Don't dwell on the details of illness or the manner of death. Don't quote endlessly from the poets and scriptures. Remember that eyes filmed with tears and an aching heart cannot follow rhetorical lengths of writing. The more nearly a note can express a hand-clasp, a thought of sympathy, above all a genuine love or appreciation of the one who has gone, the greater comfort it brings. Write as simply as possible, and let your heart speak as truly and as briefly as you can. Forget, if you can, that you are using written words. Think merely how you feel, then put your feelings on paper. That is all. Supposing it is a young mother who has died. You think how young and sweet she was, and of her little children, and literally your heart aches for them, and her husband, and her own family. Into your thoughts must come some expression of what she was, and what their loss must be. Or maybe it is the death of a man who has left a place in the whole community that will be difficult, if not impossible, to fill, and you think of all he stood for that was fine and helpful to others, and how much and sorely he will be missed. Or suppose that you are a returned soldier, and it is a pal who has died. All you can think of is, "Poor old Steve, what a peach he was. I don't think anything will ever be the same again without him." Say just that. Ask if there is anything you can do at any time to be of service to his people. There is nothing more to be said. A line, into which you have unconsciously put a little of the genuine feeling that you had for Steve, is worth pages of eloquence. A letter of condolence may be abrupt, badly constructed, ungrammatical. Never mind. Grace of expression counts for nothing. Sincerity alone is of value. It is the expression, however clumsily put, of a personal something which was loved, and will ever be missed, that alone brings solace to those who are left. Your message may speak merely of a small incident, something so trifling that in the seriousness of the present seems not worth recording, but your letter, and that of many others, each bringing a single sprig, may plant a whole memory garden in the hearts of the bereaved. Examples of notes and telegrams. As has been said above, a letter of condolence must above everything express a genuine sentiment. The few examples are inserted merely as suggestive guides for those at a loss to construct a short but appropriate note or telegram. Conventional note to an acquaintance. I know how little the words of an outsider mean to you just now, but I must tell you how deeply I sympathize with you in your great loss. Note or telegram to a friend. All my sympathy and all my thoughts are with you in your great sorrow. If I can be of any service to you, you know how grateful I shall be. Telegram to a very near relative or friend. Words are so empty, if only I knew how to fill them with love and send them to you. Or, if love and thoughts could only help you, Margaret dear, you should have all the strength of both that I can give. Letter where death was release. The letter to one whose loss is for the best is difficult in that you want to express sympathy, but cannot feel sad that one who has long suffered has found release. The expression of sympathy in this case should not be for the present death, but for the illness, or whatever it was that fell long ago. The grief for a paralyzed mother is for the stroke which cut her down many years before, and your sympathy, though you may not have realized it, is for that. You might write, "Your sorrow during all these years, and now, is in my heart, and all my thoughts and sympathy are with you." End of Chapter 27, Part 4 of Etiquette. Read by Kara Schallenberg on April 27, 2007, in Oceanside, California.